This is Dave Gaddis, and today we're interviewing Ann Bagley at her home here in Dallas. It's December 10th, 2014, so I'd like to welcome you, Ann.
Thank you.
Why don't we start at the beginning and tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Wichita Falls at Shepherd Air Force Base.
Okay, and where all did you live as a child?
You really? Okay, here we go. I went from Shepherd to Little Rock to Jackson, Mississippi to Mobile to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to Columbus, Georgia, back to Tuscaloosa to Little Rock to Rock Hill, South Carolina to Stamford, Connecticut to Atlanta. That's to get to junior in college.
Okay. Where'd you graduate from high school?
Graduated from Cross Keys High School in Atlanta.
Atlanta, okay. And I probably know the answer to this, but what did your father do that you moved around so?
Well, actually, my father was in the military when I was born, Army Air Corps.
Okay.
And he was in insurance, and then he was killed in an airplane crash. And my mother kept going back to school. So some of the moves were my mother going back to school.
Okay. Would she go back to school? Do you know?
Well, she'd been out of school 20 years. They were married almost 16 years when I was born. So she decided, after being out of school about 20 years, she went back and got a degree in what was called trades and industries, and she taught adult education,
Okay.
guidance, counseling, things.
Are you the youngest? You said?
I'm the only.
The only, okay. And so you started college?
I started college at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, and then I transferred to Georgia State.
Okay, studying what?
Pre-law, and then geography and geology, double major. So I moved out of the law early, but
Okay. So did you end up getting a degree in geography
no.
and geology?
I got married instead. I met my husband when I was 16 and married when I was almost 21. And he finished school and we moved to New Iberia, Louisiana.
Okay.
So I didn't go back to school for 11 years.
Okay. And what did your husband Jim do?
My husband Jim worked for Schlumberger as an engineer. And we didn't move as much as many people. We lived in Lafayette, New Iberia, Houma, Houston, Aberdeen, and Sugar Land.
So you got a degree in geography and geology, and what did you want to do with that?
No, I did not get a degree in I didn't.
Okay.
I quit school as a junior.
Oh, okay.
I tried very hard to be a housewife for a number of years. I'm a good mother. I'm a good wife, but housekeeper, the house would be messier, Jim said in the evening when he came home than when he left for work, because I would try every craft known to man, and I didn't do well. So when we moved back to Lafayette, I looked at going back to school. I'd lined up to go to the University of Houston, and then we got transferred, so I went to Lafayette. And that's how I got into planning, and that's kind of an interesting story, because I took my transcripts, which some were good, some were bad, grades, and I met with a dean named Irby Godet. And Dr. Godet had these little cards, and he looked at my transcript and he said, for 44 hours you can have a degree in geography and no marketable skill. And then the next card, for 52 hours you can have a degree in sociology and no marketable skill. Plop. But for 54 hours, and a bargain at that, you can have a degree in city and regional planning. So he sent me over to see the head of the planning department. And it turns out they were poker buddies and he was funneling students to that department. But I took the first class and it clicked. It was just an introduction to planning, and got into economic geography and all of that, and really grooved on it. Went from almost being on probation to honor roll, dean's list, that kind of thing. That was fun.
So what was your bachelor's degree finally in?
My bachelor's degree is in city and regional planning.
Okay.
My master's is in city and regional planning. My master's is in geography, city and regional planning option, because of the way the department was organized.
And both of these were at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which is now, well, it was USL then,
Okay.
University of Southwestern Louisiana. I finished in 79 and 81.
Okay. And you mentioned a couple of, any faculty members that stayed there?
Dennis Earhart
Okay.
was my advisor. His children went to the same school my sons did, so it was helpful. He moved a test one time because he knew I couldn't study on Halloween because of the trick-or-treaters, so I had a good deal there. And I had teaching assistantship, and then I went to work for the Evangeline Economic and Planning District, which was the next thing.
Any other students that you recall from the class you were in, or? I guess you were a little older than the rest of the students?
Oh, yes, I was a front row sitter, and some of the students, Chris Fisher, who's now Director of Planning in Monroe, I worked with him also in Houston. I really don't have a lot of them that have been active in planning. There are a number of planners that did finish at USL, or Ooh La La now.
That's how I know it as.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you went to work for Evangeline?
Economic and Planning District.
Okay.
They were planning districts in Louisiana, and they actually got line item budgeted out about a year after I left. But my first job was a grant for carpool van pools. My telephone number on my desk was the one that was on the sign on the highway. So I had money to spend to advertise, to do carpools and van pools. Except Lafayette, Louisiana is a company car town, and they weren't real interested. We did get one carpool from the Petroleum Club workers, but it was not a big deal. But I did get on television, and I did get interviewed, and it was considered a successful grant. So.
Okay.
That and doing some area plan, similar parish sector books, information books.
Now, you mentioned that it was struck from the budget a year
few years later.
Did you stay on, or?
No, we actually got transferred to Aberdeen, Scotland.
Okay.
So I had to leave my first job after a little less than a year.
Okay.
And we were in Scotland, and I couldn't work in Scotland, and because the planners there were actually job sharing. And to get any information on the city, when I did the Boy Scouts citizenship in the community, I ended up talking to the city treasurer. Was the only way I could get any information on the city. When I went to the planning office, they were scared of me. So I don't know what they thought, but it was very much, the land use map was 1954, and you wasn't any different than what was there in the mid-'80s.
And so how long was your husband over in Aberdeen?
A year, 2 weeks, and 4 days.
Okay.
So we were there.
But it was probably a great opportunity to go out and travel. And
Oh, we enjoyed it tremendously. We did a lot of traveling in England, and we went to Paris and to Amsterdam and to Venice, and we were good little tourists there.
you got to see things from a city planning point of view?
Oh, yes. So I would always have to find City Hall, but I liked castles too, so they were between the castles and the city halls.
So you came back to the States after that?
We came back to Sugar Land. My husband worked in Roche Sharon, and he was on a temporary assignment, so I didn't really look for a job, but I did start going to the APA meetings.
Okay.
I actually, backing up to school a little bit, it was 1978 when APA emerged as the singular planning organization that our Dr. Earhart said absolutely everybody had to join. So I'm a charter member from 1978.
Did you belong to ESPO or
No,
anything before that?
didn't even know about it. It was a little innocent student at that point.
So you started going to the Houston section meetings?
I went to the Houston section meetings, kind of started thinking about sort of looking for a job. And that's where I met Mary Lou Henry, and I met, let's see, who else? I met Sarah Jane White and Mike McAnally and Rick Mobley and that group.
Okay.
So
did you eventually get a job? Or?
I eventually got a job. I had an in-between job. My sons found me a job. I was a tour guide at Imperial Sugar for a year. And the day that Jim's permanent assignment came through, I walked across the street from Imperial Sugar to Sugarland City Hall, which was in an old feed store at that time. And I talked to Marina Sukup. And I said, do you need a planner? I'm brand new at this, but do you need a planner? She said, yes, I do. And she hired me that day. So I didn't go there. So I worked in Sugarland. I really didn't know. I worked for the planning district, so to go in and I was the planner. I mean, they'd never had a planner before. Marina or city engineer had done basically the plats, very little done in zoning. So it was a real foundational education for Sugar Land. I remember getting the first plat. I got the big Mylar, and the city engineer says, go check it out and go record it at the county. And I'm going, uh-oh. So I called up my advisor, and he said, well, get the subdivision regulations. And they were a Dr. Rossler subdivision regulations, straight out of A&M, the standard Euclidean zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. And so he said, make a list. And, yes, sir, I'll make a list. I made a list and checked the list and checked it against the plat. Eventually, in working there, I think I checked a plat for about 108 things after that list. So learned a lot about platting at that point.
And how long were you at Sugar Land?
Well, it's actually at Sugar Land twice.
Okay.
I started there in '85. In '86, they had a budget cut because they wanted to reduce their tax rate. So the new public works director had to pick between me and his buddy, the CIP coordinator, and he picked the CIP coordinator. They had money to spend, I did understand. It's probably the best thing that ever happened to me, but when I left there, I left everything stacked up on his desk with all the instructions, because I was doing right-of-way acquisition, I was doing zoning, I was doing budget, I was doing annexation, all this. I stacked all these piles on his desk and with all the instructions, and I write very, very small, so there were all these instructions handwritten on what he had to do. And he walked in and says, "Oops, I made a mistake." So, but it was a good opportunity for me. It probably pushed me out the door because I went back to school, thinking I'd go get my PhD. And I went to talk to Rice, and they said, well, go take the state and local government class at community college. So I did that, taught swimming, did a few other things, tried to learn to knit, didn't work. Didn't work the first time, didn't going to work again. And so then a job opening came open at the city of Houston. Entry-level planner, fine, I'm good with that. And again, Marina Sukup by that time had gone to work for the city of Houston, so she hired me there. So I worked as an entry-level planner there, and we were doing a run-up to zoning. And so we were doing what we call sector plans for the city of Houston. And we all drew the sector out of a hat. We drew which one it was. And I got River Oaks Greenway Plaza. So I'm working with a bunch of guys, very nice men, but two militant Hispanics, one Nigerian, one we weren't sure where he was from. I think he was from somewhere, Bangladesh or something. A guy from Arkansas, and anyway, it was an interesting group. So they go, a little white lady gets rich folks. So learned a lot about River Oaks and Greenway Plaza. One of the interesting things with that, we're working on the aerials, working on land use maps. Of course, they talk about Houston not having zoning, but they really just don't have land use controls. They've got everything else, but no. So we were working with the ladies that were making the land use maps. And so I went in one day, and this sweet little lady, and she was just madly coloring this area plan map. And she's coloring it all red. And I'm going, that's not commercial. Those are houses. No. So, and over by Greenway Plaza, there was some apartments that were used for office buildings. So she's coloring those brown for apartments. No, those are offices. No. So I had to get a car from the city of Houston and take this little lady out. And we drove around River Oaks with her maps, and the only words that came out of her mouth every time was, wah, wah. She just didn't believe that these huge houses were not businesses. So anyway, she had to go back and recolor her map, which wasn't very fun. But I got involved with APA at that point with the Houston section. The treasurer for the state conference was in Houston that year, '88, I believe. And the treasurer had moved to Dallas, so they needed a conference treasurer. So I got pulled into that and got very active with the Houston section at that point.
So how long did you work in Houston, city of Houston?
About 18 months. I got, well, a little less than 18 months probably. I got an offer to go back to work for Sugar Land.
Okay.
So I went back to work for Sugar Land for twice the amount of money I was making at Houston. And
They must have made you a good offer for you to go back.
they did. Yeah, there's sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't have gone back, but again, I worked there then for 6 years.
Okay.
So
And you were living in Sugar Land?
lived in Sugar Land, so it was the
So just for context, do you remember how big Sugar Land was the
Oh,
first time
yes.
you went there? And then-
I had to do a population study for the city of Sugar Land, really for the future annexation census. We did an annexation management plan, which won an APA award. And it was $15,265.
Okay.
And the way we did it is Sugar Land had their water billing. And we'd check the water billing. We matched the water billing against the homeowners associations. They helped us fill it all out. And we matched, and then we interviewed people, and we came out with the $15,265. And I was terrified to go in and tell the new city administrator that it was that much, because every time the mayor was asked the population of Sugar Land, he upped it by 1,000. So we'd grown to 22,000 according to the mayor. So I went in with these numbers, and I felt pretty good about them because I'd come close in talking to different people. And I said 15,265, and he said, fine. But we had matched the school district. The school district gave us their role, so we were matching. So we had ethnicity from the school district. So we were pretty good stead.
Do you happen to recall what the population was when you left the second time?
24 something, not right under 25.
You happen to know what the population is now?
About 82.
Okay.
But it's almost the same area as I had there. I would have as many as 20 plats on an agenda at a time. So that's where I really got to be the plat lady at that point.
So the second tour, did you do basically the same thing as you did the first time, or did you
Oh.
do some additional stuff?
I think I did a little bit of everything, which was really good. I had budget stuff. We did annexation. We did, like I said, we had done an annexation management plan, and we began to annex the different areas. We had, part of the population study was to create single-member districts. And so the Justice Department approved all my numbers for that. So when we went back to annex the first municipal utility district, it wasn't the one we thought we were going to, and we annexed the district closest to the city, actually, and it was one standard deviation off of the other 3 existing districts in the city. It became District 4. We didn't have to redistrict anything. We just brought in a district, which was, Justice Department thought that was kind of cool.
Okay. Any other projects you did at Sugar Land that you're particularly proud of?
There are a number of projects there. One is rewriting the subdivision regulations, which with a few minor changes of the subdivision regulations they're using now. They were written in 1994, and without much change. They're still the ones that are online, because I check every once in a while to be sure. We did a comprehensive plan. They thought they had all these plans. They had the water wastewater plan, and they had the drainage plan, and this plan and that plan, but they were all very engineering oriented. And I said, you really need to tie this together. You don't have a land use plan. Well, we got a land use plan here and here and here. Well, we need kind of be working off the same page. So the conference was in Houston again, and I took the city engineer, and she came out of one of the short course meetings going, all we need to have a full-blown comprehensive plan is a land use plan and some goals, objectives. So it was worth taking her to that. So we did the comp plan, and pretty busy there. I did a lot. I did massive number of right-of-way acquisitions for the widening of Highway 6. I stopped the overpasses over streets in Highway 6. I was able to get a letter writing campaign started by the developer, which if they knew in Sugar Land I'd done that. They got 800 letters protesting, and so I didn't have to answer them, but the city did answer them. The city really was fortunate in the city of Sugar Land, as they had some very good developers that were good to work with. We still said no, but to a number of things.
So what made you leave Sugar Land the second time?
Probably a court case. I had to testify in a court case. We had not handled a plat very well, or a zoning case. But I got offered a job with a small firm that had done our comp plan. Said, come do some other kind of real planning was the thing. So I went to.
Which firm was that?
I went to work for Centurion Consulting with Tom Knickerbocker.
Okay.
And I learned a lot there. And I had the opportunity to do the Fort Bend County Parks Plan with him. And it became time to leave there. And so I went to work as a special consultant to Fort Bend County to finish the Parks Plan. And then probably one of the things I'm proudest of is we got a Parks grant, Texas Parks and Wildlife grant, for the Bates M. Allen County Park. So we were the #1 grant that year, so it was good.
And so how long did you stay with Centurion, and how long did you work for Fort Bend County?
Well, it's kind of got, it was in the 90s, about 4 years in there. I was Centurion probably about 2 years, and then Fort Bend County about 2. Before we thought we were moving to Paris. Jim got transferred to Paris, France, not Paris, Texas. But, and then that didn't work out, which was probably good. And so I had met Mike McAnally, and by that time I was treasurer of the state treasurer for the Texas chapter. And so they had Wilbur Smith had an ad, and I had worked on my own, but for a little while, done some work. But I called him up and said, "You need somebody with just a little more experience. I don't want to go back in as entry level again." And so I went to work for Wilbur Smith in 1998.
And what kinds of projects did you do for Wilbur Smith that you're particularly proud of?
Well, we did a number of comp plans, but probably what I'm proudest of are 2 park grants, park expansion grants, one in Pharr, Texas, and the other one in San Benito. The Resaca, where Freddie Fender swam, so I got to meet Freddie Fender on that. But probably in the Farmington, New Mexico comprehensive plan. I was not on the project, and the project manager left Wilbur Smith, and so I became project manager on the Farmington plan. I go out there to a meeting, and we sit down with the city manager, and I'm told that the plan's about 80% complete. We'd billed for about 80%. City manager sits down and says, "I think this plan's about 30% complete." And it's like, uh-oh, what have I gotten myself into? So we had to basically, in a lot of ways, start over. Wilbur Smith was very good. They underwrote everything I did, and we turned out a very good comp plan. It won a New Mexico chapter comp plan award. So that's one of the things I'm proud of.
Okay. So how long did you stay with Wilbur Smith?
Until 2007.
Okay.
And I'd been backing off from that. Jim had retired, and we had grandchildren coming, and we were remodeling this house and the house next door at the same time. So Jim kept saying, if you're going to work that much and travel that much, we need to back off. So, and Wilbur Smith was beginning to get sort of out of the comp planning in Texas. It was supposed to be that lost leader, and it never really panned out as a full-blown lost leaders for that. So I began to back out, but in 2005, I had a change too. I was appointed to the Dallas City Plan Commission. And that came about because somebody tried to build houses, small houses at the end of this street, actually townhomes and then patio homes. So even before I lived here, I was involved with getting that plat turned down and the zoning changed. So
part of the neighborhood association?
Well, it's just a neighborhood group.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I was going to ask you how you got appointed to the Dallas Planning Commission, and that kind of explains
Yeah,
that.
well, it was kind of interesting. Part of that was that I came to the attention of Leo Cheney, and that was about the time that all the stuff was going on about Don Hill and the bribery and whatever, D'Angelo Lee, and I say I was appointed by Leo Cheney's staff. They kept saying he needed a new planning commissioner because my predecessor was probably one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet, was a retired school principal who happened to work for the developer that was at the center of the thing, all the controversy, running his after-school programs, and he may have voted on some of his employer's cases. And so Leo was looking around and saying, I got to have somebody. So they said, here's this lady. Yeah, she can be your planning commissioner.
And when were you first appointed to the commission?
I was appointed like in August of 2005, but working for a consulting firm, I had to get a lot of clearance that I didn't have any conflicts of interest. So it took until December of 2005.
Okay.
So
and you're still on the commission?
I'm on now as a holdover. My council member won't appoint a new planning commissioner, and she's term limited. So I'm still there for right now.
Okay. And have you continued working as a consultant?
I have really backed off a lot. I didn't really look for work. What I enjoy doing is more the training of planning commissioners. I do that with Texas chapter now as the planning official development officer, and worked around that, do some individual training, worked with when we were doing the regional planning, but grandchildren kind of came into some of that, so 4 of them.
Well, let's go back and kind of fill in the APA. You
Yeah.
talked about getting involved in the Houston section and that you were the conference treasurer for the Houston conference. You mentioned that you became the chapter treasurer. Do you remember how you got involved with that? Were you asked or?
I don't really, it's kind of interesting. I think I was asked,
Okay.
probably. I don't think I just came up and said I wanted to run, but I had been involved, and of course, Mike McAnally was running for president-elect at that point, I think, and so it was like, well, maybe we ought to do this. And I've been treasurer of a number of different organizations, so it kind of became logical to do that. And so I got elected to that.
And how long did you serve in the chapter?
I served 2 terms there, so it was 4 years I served with you.
Okay.
And
Well, I was going to ask, do you remember some of the other members of the board at that time? And do you remember any of the issues that may have been?
well, we went through a lot of the planning with Karen Walls, doing the development, sort of a development plan, strategic plan for the chapter. I had kind of an awkward beginning as the treasurer. I took over from someone who had not really kept up with the treasurer stuff. So one of my things that I'm very proud of that with APA is that we were able to get the books organized and caught up, and a format that we used for several years, a good reporting out format, computer-wise, and you used it until all those changes with IRS. That means it's much more complicated now, but it was.
But as I recall, the books were in such a mess that the IRS was threatening to revoke our nonprofit status.
Well, they didn't get quite to that, but I got home with these boxes. I was closing the back of my car, and the fellow said, oh, by the way, I didn't file the IRS reports for the last 2 years. So fortunately, I went to church with a guy that was an accountant, and we sat on the floor of his office and organized the cash and the checks and the reports, and so it took about a year to get all of that cleaned up, but and then ended up being a conference treasurer. The chapter treasurer also became the conference treasurer those years, so there was a lot of activity there, so, it started with you and with Mike McAnally and Karen Walls and Helen Eve and Michelle McCoy, board members at that time.
Okay, and when you finished being chapter treasurer, what did you do then in APA?
Well, let's see, when I just did the planning official development officer for a while,
Okay.
and then I was called.
And you might explain what that position
Okay.
is responsible for.
All right, the planning official development officer basically has the responsibility for looking to see if planning commissioners get training, and the main focus of that for the chapter has been for 30-something years something called the short course, which is sessions at our annual conference for planning that are specifically targeted to planning commissioners. So that's introduction to planning, which you do, and introduction to zoning and subdivision regulations, and roles and responsibilities, letting them know what really how to behave as commissioners, what they should read their packet and not talk when they shouldn't and talk when they should. But that's been a big focus. I think I've been doing that about 8 years now. So.
Okay. And did you get involved with that before you were appointed to the Dallas Planning Commission? Or?
Yes, I was actually involved with that before.
Okay.
I'd done it a couple of times at the state conference, but it was kind of all came along together. So.
And at some point in time, you got involved on the national level.
Okay, I got called about the time I was appointed and asked if I'd like to run for the planning official position on the board. There's a board member at large focused, and it's on planning commissioners. But at that time, I really wasn't on the commissions. So 2 years later, I got this call again. I said, would you like to run for the planning commissioner thing? And you got to have your position statement in 2 days. And so I wrote the position statement. I sent it in. I said, all right, I'll do it. But this is a long shot. Nobody knows me. So I get this form back, and it says, you've been nominated for board at large. Now wait a minute. I said I'd run for the planning commissioner focused position. Well, you can't do that because you pay your dues as a practicing planner. Okay, so I ran to, but by the way, would you like to change your position statement? You got 2 days to do it. So I redid a position statement, and I was fortunate enough to be elected to then.
Okay. And so how long have you been on the board?
It's 5 years now because I have them in a second term. They don't call it re-elected. You run for a second term. So.
Okay. And who are some of the people on the board that you've dealt with, and who's been the APA president?
Well, when I went on the board, APA president was Bruce Knight.
Okay.
And Mitch
Silver
was the president-elect at that time. So we went on together and looking at really starting to change the dynamics of the board. Paul Farmer and Bruce looked around and realized that there were a lot of women there and there were a number of minorities. So it was an interesting change for that. But a lot of the people had been there for a very long time, or worked through or come through chapter president's council or divisions. So I was kind of the who is she and what is she doing here, type of person. So it took me a little time to get in. But Carol Ray was on the board at that time, and she's now the president-elect of APA. Served with Mitch Silver while he was president. I was on the governance committee, which worked on, most of the work was done when I got on there, but looking at the synchronized and election cycle that will begin next year. And then I got myself appointed to the planning officials committee. So I'm vice chair of that. No, usually another board member's not on that committee, but it was interesting to work with Shedrick Coleman, who's that elected, and he got elected for a second term as well. So we've been trying to figure out how many planning commissions there are in the United States, why we don't have more planning commissioner members, but actually I think APA nationally is going to have to look at building their membership a lot through planning commissioners, because every planner in some shape, form, or fashion got to deal with planning commissioners. So both planning commissioners need to learn how to deal with planners, but planners need to learn to deal how to planning commissioners as well.
And as I recall, you're also involved in the awards committee?
I've been the For 3 years, I was on the awards committee, which is a really nifty experience to get to see some fabulous projects. So I was co-chair with Marie York the first year, and then I was chair the second year and chair again the third year. So I really got to see some fabulous projects. So it's a lot of work. You have to read all that stuff, but it's fun to do that.
And you're currently serving. When does your term end?
My term ends December 2017, and so I've got a while to go. I'm still working with the Planning Commissioner thing, but the new project for me now is the Planning Foundation, looking at trying to make it a viable organization. We're not getting the contributions or using the funds right now to really foster what we should be. The scholarships need to be beefed up and more awarded and more of the money spent. And so with the new executive director, we're getting some traction there. And now I'm on that. So now I'm on the Planning Foundation board.
Okay.
So
do you remember when you took the AICP exam?
1991.
And
I passed it the first time.
okay.
So
Good experience for you.
took it with Gary Mitchell.
Okay.
So.
And then sometime later, you were elected to the College of Fellows?
That was a surprise. That was that was not on my radar because I thought I'm past that. I was moving out of being active career-wise, but I'm just honored to have been selected. And I think we had 3 from Texas that year, Roberta Burrows and Joe Pobner. And so it was class 2010.
Okay.
And so.
And congratulations.
Thank you. Same to you.
We talked a little bit about maybe some of the mentors you had in college during your professional career. Did you have any mentors?
I really consider Sarah Jane White and somewhat Mary Lou Henry. They were good examples for me. I asked Sarah Jane for a job one time when she was in Bel Air, and she said, "You don't want to work for me." So it's like, okay, but Doris Davis was another one. Actually, when I went to work for Centurion, Doris had her own office and then had moved to Kellogg, I guess. And so I had Doris's desk, and I had her chair, and I had her credenza, so I had Doris right there. And then also my sons were similar. Hers were a bit older than mine, but my oldest son is an artist. Her oldest son was an artist. My second son was interested in international relations. Her son was in the State Department. So we had a lot, so I consider Doris somewhat that.
Well, it's interesting that all of the ones you named were women. Some of the women that we've interviewed have talked about some of the challenges based on gender, and I just wonder if you ever experienced any?
The biggest challenge I had was working down in the valley more on comp plans, because in FAR. And when I'd go to FAR, they would, and it was Mike McAnally but I was assistant deputy project manager, and he was project manager, except he was project manager on 13 other things, so it was really my project. So I went down there, and everything, they would talk to him and not to me. And it was, if they needed a letter or something, have Mike write a letter. And so, okay, I'd write the letter, Mike would sign it, or the secretary would forge his signature. And but I gradually I had a very interesting gentleman that was the chairman of our advisory committee in FAR, and this was like in 1999, 2000, and he drove this enormous truck, and he was a short man, and all he could talk about were the riots in FAR. Well, I had no idea what the riots in FAR were, but we began to work through with him, and finally he was beginning to talk to me. And then when we proposed to do the park plan, he was the chair of the Parks Board, so he said, "I want her." And so after that, I didn't have any problems in FAR. But I found that. I found in Starr County, when we did a colonia study there, and that was massive, 140 colonias that were undocumented, semi-documented, semi-legal communities. My contact at the county was a lady, so I had a time there. I did see some of it in Wilbur Smith, that they were more prone to promoting men than that. But I really learned to kind of stand up for myself along those lines.
Okay.
So.
Well, we talked about mentors. Are there any proteges that you're particularly proud of, people that you have mentored?
They've got such a great group of younger planners. I don't really think I can't really take credit for any of them. I did get Gary Mitchell a job. It was an interesting timing. He was at HGAC, and we'd worked together in the Houston section somewhat. And for some very strange reason, he emailed me his resume. And he said, have a look at it and see if it, works. And about that same time that the email came in, one of our planners resigned. And I said, fix this, this, and this, and send it back. I'm turning it in. So he did get a job. So it wasn't exactly a mentor, but it was kind of a contact.
If you had some advice for a young planner, what would it be? I
think one of the things that young planners need to do is, if they possibly can, they need to work for a city. They need that basis to go in and try to be a consultant without knowing how your client operates or what the client expects. Or if you know it, one of the biggest compliments I got as a consultant was, you think too much like a city employee. Yeah, but that's how it's got to work. So I think if they possibly can, they ought to be willing to take that entry-level job, that front desk, whatever it is, to get that basis of knowing whether it's a big city or a little city. I was very fortunate in Sugar Land. Being the only one there, I had to figure out a lot of the stuff by myself, but it gave me a fabulous foundation because I had to deal with zoning. I had to deal with great big guys who came in and wanted to open a bar, and I thought I was going to have to get a Rottweiler because I was turning them down. No, sir, you can't have a bar there. I worked with annexation. I worked with the municipal utility districts. Just that foundation of doing it. And my husband says my feet don't touch the floor anymore because I go from soapbox to soapbox, trying these causes that I get. But I think right now with younger planners, we got into this mode, and I think it's very good. We want to be visionary as planners. And it said we don't want to be known as regulators. Well, we are regulators. We should understand the regulations. So to me, the younger people coming out of college have got to be visionary regulators. They've got to know when the regulations can be changed. They've got to see the big and beyond. But they've also got to be regulated visionaries, because you've got to understand that it's got to work both ways. So you want to move things forward, but if you don't understand how it works and where you can move forward, it's...
So you've worked both in the public sector and the private sector. Do you prefer one over the other, or?
I'm partial to the public sector. That's probably why I'm serving on Plan Commission. It's like being a planner with current planner, but I don't have to write the reports, and I can just read them and pick fault with them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about being on the Plan Commission. Are there any particular issues or projects that you've
there's some that I'm really interesting.
Not so proud of?
Well, being the only planner on Plan Commission, and I'm the only planner that's ever been on Dallas Plan Commission, people say, well, that must make it easy for you. It's easier to read the packet and all the material, and I know what to skip, and the words jump out. But as far as making those decisions and voting, it's not any easier. I mean, maybe somebody that doesn't know what some of the repercussions could be. I am looked at, I've given a good bit of respect by my fellow commissioners. I do have that when certain zoning cases come up and they start talking about the applicant, what a nice lady she is, and that, and they all kind of turn and look at me, and I go, zoning goes with the land, not with this nice lady. No, her mother may be in the hospital and she's got great shoes, but she could flip this property tomorrow. You got to think about, is this, so that's it. Almost for several years there, it was every meeting. It was like, zoning goes with the land, not with this applicant. And that's still a challenge on Planning Commission. They want to give somebody the opportunity. It's not up to us to give her the opportunity. Council wants to give them opportunity, fine, but we've got to look at land use. Their projects, I came into Dallas at the end of the work on Forward Dallas, the comp plan. As a planner, there were things I would have liked to have seen incorporated. Planning Commission sent forth 45 separate recommendations to council, then went forward from staff, and the council took 29 of the 45 that we recommended. The one I didn't see happen that I would have liked to have seen happen in Dallas would have been park dedication. They don't have that, and if you think about all these apartments and everything, what could be done in Dallas Parks Department if there was some park dedication. Bear Street has gotten some good publicity and bad publicity, but I think it was just maybe a little ahead of its time. So there's a community garden going in down there. Actually, it's more than a community garden, it's a market garden. I've gotten changes made to the development plan, not as much as I'd like to. I've got bike parking in the parking ordinance. I've got possibly, instead of street name changes, historic street name, honorary street name changes rather than permanent street name changes. That's going forward.
Any other organizations besides APA that you've been involved with?
I've been involved with my church. I'm on church board right now. I am a founding member of the Friends of White Rock Hill Library. Let's see. I'm on the I'm Vice President of Programs for Greater Dallas Planning Council. And that's an interesting group that...
you might explain a little bit about what that group is.
Greater Dallas Planning Council is an older group. I once called them Suits and Coots. I shouldn't do that. But it was started actually by very wealthy people, R.L. Thornton and Trammell Crow, who wrote checks when they wanted stuff done. But it was really to begin to look at what planning is. So it's sort of a consortium of engineers and architects and a number of planners and interested parties that come together to have breakfast and board meetings and try to be able to provide some input into policies in the city of Dallas and some of the other cities.
Okay.
So,
you mentioned your kids. What are any of your kids gone into planning?
No, but one of the biggest compliments I ever got one time, my son was, my second son Steve had taken all the State Department exams and he was coming up to Dallas for an interview and realized at the last minute that he hadn't written the one-page paper of why he was interested in the world, so to speak. He wrote the paper. He passed all the tests. He didn't get hired, but he did pass all the tests. But I found the paper that he'd written. He left it a copy of it, and it said he'd gotten interested in the world because his mother had gone back to school, and there were maps all over the house, and he was fascinated with maps and fascinated with with what could happen and how planning was necessary. And he took it to a more global level, but of thinking about how the world functioned and how cities functioned. So it was a big compliment along those lines. So.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
No, I just appreciate the people that I've had the opportunity to work with, some very good planners. Sometimes planners that work in cities get criticized in the paper, and they really shouldn't. People should have to walk in their shoes sometimes and see what they're up against. I was very fortunate to have that very good advisor, although I started calling him Dr. Grumpy, because when I passed the AICP, I called him up and I said, I passed the AICP test, and he said, oh, they give that to anybody these days. So when I got the notice of the FAICP, I thought, I'm going to call him. And I told Jim, I said, he's going to say the same thing. And so I called him, and I said, I've been honored with FAICP, and he said, and I said, I think I'm your first one. And he said, oh, they give that to anybody these days. And I thought, but apparently he did write me a nice email and apologized and said he was proud of me. But I've had some very nice people in my life that have supported me, and my husband's been very supportive of all my work, whether I'm going hither, thither, and yon, and on the phone more than he'd like. But I'm very grateful to have really gotten into something that just seemed to be the right fit.
And he's retired now, so are you traveling? Or?
We travel some. We've been to England several times, and Italy, and around, and want to go more. He likes going to the conferences. I send him on those mobile workshops, and then he's dangerous because he knows stuff.
And just to clarify, he likes to go to APA conferences.
He'll go to APA conferences. Yes, if we're going to, yes. So.
Well, I think with that, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us.
Well, thank you very much.